Okay, called the meeting to order. Call roll, please.
Absolutely. Dr. Magoulias?
Here.
Mrs. Reynolds?
Here.
Mr. Yatoni?
Here.
Mr. File?
Here.
Mrs. Johnson?
Here.
Mr. Goebel?
Here.
Mr. Carley?
Here.
Thank you. So we have a public hearing tonight on the consideration whether the Board of Education should approve a resolution to utilize an e-learning program in the event of inclement weather. And I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Cox.
His microphone has
no.
been turned off.
That's unacceptable, Dan. There's nothing there.
Is he at home or in the district office? Maybe he could
Test.
go with Todd.
You can hear me?
I
We
can't hear you.
now.
I can't
Yep.
hear any of you.
Can you hear me, Dan? No.
Jennifer's going in with her computer right now.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. All right.
I can
That's going
mute
to give a
you.
lot of feedback.
There, now I've muted him.
But now we can't hear him.
You can hear me now, right? But you have
Yep.
feedback.
Yep.
Could it be his telephone's too close to the laptop?
The laptop's too close to the
Johnson
desktop.
is muting. I wonder if she got kicked off.
I've been kicked off twice and joined back in.
Okay.
In the meantime, are there others on the call that need to identify themselves?
Why don't you?
Kaylee Gustafson is on the call.
Thank you, Mrs. Gustafson.
Francesca Torselli is on the call.
Thank you.
The participation is terrific if we can get our superintendent on the call.
Very true, ma'am.
I can see them trying to fix it there, though.
Can we have anyone who's not currently speaking, please muted? That may assist with the issue here. So let's get anybody who is not currently speaking muted.
Hi, everybody.
Hello.
I'm back.
And the floor is yours, Mr. Cox.
Well, this was the most unique start to a meeting I've ever had, so I will say that. And I didn't hear the beginning of this. I've been called a lot of things in my career, but I've never been called Suzanne Keller. So I see that on my screen tonight. So,
Lucky guy.
so first, I would like to welcome all of our College Now students. I know we have a class here listening in on a public meeting, and you're actually getting to listen in on a very unique one with it being remote. As you can see, there's certainly challenges and we have to be adaptable and flexible with that. So this first public hearing this evening is about our e-learning. I want to make sure everyone understands this is not to be confused with remote learning that we are under because of response to the COVID pandemic. The Illinois State Board of Education has given school districts the ability to call e-learning days in lieu of inclement weather days, and to continue moving forward with remote instruction on a day whenever there's a snowstorm or if school had to be canceled because of an emergency, we could call remote learning that day. That is something that our school district was planning to explore. I know I had a few initial conversations early last spring, even before I got here, because some of our teams were looking at that and seeing what we could do to possibly use e-learning days. And at that time, this was before the pandemic, I laughed and said, it's probably, yeah, we'll go that direction, but it's not the first thing that we're going to do. And little did I know a few months later that remote learning was going to be something very big for us. So our response to the COVID pandemic has accelerated our timeline significantly and our ability to deliver remote instruction significantly. This particular hearing, we have to have conversations with our union. We have to talk about what the day would look like, what the expectations would be, which we have all done within our remote learning plan. We essentially mirrored our remote learning plan with the inclement weather. It would be my recommendation whenever we get to that point on the agenda that we do approve the e-learning days. It will allow us to call a remote. It does not mean we have to, but we certainly can call a remote day. This waiver would be in effect for 3 years, at which time the board could decide to renew the waiver or to discontinue it.
Thank you. Okay, I'm going to open this up to the board for any discussions or questions.
I've got one comment, and that's just the recognition that I was trying to find the silver lining to all of this a couple meetings ago, and was talking with Jamie Tolan, and he said the best thing to think of is that we'll never have to have another snow day. And he's right.
So that depends on who you ask. If you ask some of our kids, that's not the case. They would rather have the snow day probably.
And I know, but you're always trying to find victories to celebrate, and I guess maybe Mr. Tolan was a prophet. So anyway.
Okay.
I have a similar comment as both a former student and a former teacher. It is kind of sad to lose that idea that once in a while you get a surprise day off, but the payoff is then you're not getting days tagged on to the end of the school year. And it's a lot easier than for families to plan if they wanted to go on a vacation early, different things. So I think the payoff outweighs that.
You indicated that we didn't have to use an e-learning day, but that we would have the option. What would be the considerations for when we would and we would not?
I would recommend that we would do remote learning in those instances or an e-learning day in those instances where it may be a day or 2 days at a time. If we get into a spot where it's several weeks, those rare occurrences, it seems like once every decade, and the way this year's going, this might be one of them, that you're out of school for 10 or more days at a time. You may decide not to at that piece. The other part would be depending on the incident. I can think of one instance in my career where the snow and ice was so bad that it knocked out all electricity, internet, everything like that for 2 to 3 days. That may not be a big of an issue here in this area, but it certainly was at one time. We wouldn't have been able to do remote learning even if we wanted to at that time, or were able to, I should say.
Thank you.
Are there any public comments on this consideration for an e-learning program in the event of inclement weather? Okay. Then I think we can. Dan, do we need to vote on this?
Christy, I did have one other comment that I wanted to make.
Okay.
And that's that we don't want to see a situation where it becomes too easy to call an e-learning day. I think we still want to stick to the same type of decision model that we've always had, which when the risk of putting kids on the bus is too much, then we call it. But I still think that it's something that definitely, if you see the weather is going to be terrible, you could call it the day before. But I don't want a future board or a future superintendent to say, well, next week looks bad, so we're going to call an e-learning week because it might snow one of those days. You know, we've all suffered through this first semester of e-learning, and I don't want to find ourselves sliding back into that too easily.
Mm-hmm. That's, I think that's good to know. Important. Thank you. Okay, there is not a vote needed on this, so I can just ask for a motion to close the meeting.
So moved.
So moved.
Thank you, Amy, and I'll take the other one as a second. Okay, all those in favor?
Aye.
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 All right, thank you. All right, so we can close that meeting, and I think we can roll right into our next public meeting that we needed to have here tonight. Okay, so I'm going to call the next meeting to order. Katie, can you please call roll again?
Sure. Dr. Magoulias,
Yes.
Mrs. Reynolds,
Yes.
Mrs. Johnson,
Yes.
Mr. File,
Here.
Mr. Carley,
Here.
Mr. Tony,
Here.
Mr. Goebel.
Okay, this is a this is a budget hearing, and I will turn it over to Mr. McDermott and Mr. Cox.
Okay, Katie, can you hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, are
And
you
if
gonna share? Yeah.
Yes, bear with me just one
I think
moment and we'll
Katie's
take
going
care of that.
to, yeah, Katie's gonna share the presentation, I believe, so everybody can just follow along, but I'll try to go through this quickly, and then if anybody's got any questions at the end, I can go ahead and answer those, because I'll try not to spend a lot of time on the individual slides, but this is just to give you that informational piece for each part of the budget.
Can you see the slide, sir?
There we go. Now, yeah, you got it now. All right, so if you just want to flip to the second page of that. This slide's just informational wise. I don't know for the newer board members in terms of the fund accounting, if you're familiar with that, but the three main funds are our operating funds, which are the education, O&M, and transportation funds. And then the capital and special purpose funds are all other funds for those individual purposes as well. And then some of that information down below is just for your information in terms of where things get posted in those individual budgets. So Katie, if you want to move to the next one. Some of the items that have affected our projections for FY21, the most important, that top one, with the uncertainty of the costs associated with COVID-19 and what it's going to take to get through this year, along with state funding being held flat, that has definitely affected our projections. So really, at this point in time, a lot of the projections. Katie, I'm getting a lot of feedback.
Fantastic. Okay, I'll ask them to.
So anyway, with the state funding, obviously they've held that flat for this year, which technically is a decrease for us, as well as every other school district in the state. But that's one of the more important line items. With this past year, we received a little over 130,000 in additional funds on our tier funding. This year, that will be zero. And some of the other things that are probably a bigger item in this year's budget. Our health insurance premiums were up 3.8%, just under 4, which normally is a good renewal, but with revenues flat, obviously that's an increased expense for the projections. And then obviously enrollment is down for a variety of reasons. I think this year, hopefully we'll get some of that back next year, or maybe even in the second half of this year. But enrollment is down and trending downward. And then our EAV growth, which basically, is a bigger part of what we look at in terms of our tax levy. So that's really only been about 1.5% to 2% over the last few years. And you can see new construction is not very much in that figure. New construction definitely helps us out in that first year that it's collected. So you can see that's not that big of an increase this year either. Okay, if you want to move on to the next one. And then on the revenue side of things, this is just some information for you guys as well. But you can see for the tax rate, our tax rate for the last 3 years it's gone down. That's mainly because of our EAV increases. This year's decrease in our tax rate, a little over 10 cents, mainly comes from, I guess, a combination of two things. We have abated $300,000 from the capital projects fund to our debt service fund, as well as some of the underlying factors with EAV, but then also we reduced our tax levy mainly in our O&M fund, so that has an impact on the overall budget as well. For the Sangamon County sales tax revenue, I've currently budgeted just under $1.3 million for the year. I'm hoping that holds true. It really, at this point, is throwing out a number. You can see what we collected last year, but this year will be the first year with 12 months coming in. So hopefully that number will go up maybe towards the end of the fiscal year. And then you can see overall in our total budget, our tax extension over last year is $66,000 less. And like I had mentioned before, that's a little bit of a combination of the abatement we used, as well as trying to just reduce the overall tax rate in general by at least 10 cents, which we accomplished that. But that does have an effect on the revenue side of things. So we are receiving less tax revenue this year than last. You can see the enrollment numbers from the last few years, and obviously this year, that number is what I used my projections on the budget. And then you can see the general state aid or evidence-based and tier funding amounts going into this year compared to last year. Move on to the next one. And then this is just some of the comparisons side by side from last year to this year. Obviously, the top two items there, the general state aid funding and tier funding held flat, along with some of the other revenue items that have seen a decrease, some of our grant funding, and then as well as interscholastic due to participation, as well as gate revenues. I've cut that by 50%. Our interest income has been cut over half as well, and that's in each of the funds. That's a huge impact on the ed fund. In the O&M fund, you can see that reduction of a little over $134,000 in the tax levy. So the O&M fund obviously was a reduction, or took most of that reduction. And then some of the other items were divvied up to increase other levies, but also allow us to reduce the overall tax rate. Most of the expenses really are normal increases from year to year. There's nothing really that jumps out other than, some of the underlying, tech equipment in that roughly remains the same. The College Now program obviously is a major increase in cost. The number of students has probably doubled over last year, so that's why there's a large increase there. And then you can see some of the other expenses in the O&M, transportation, and then a breakdown of the health insurance cost in each of those funds. All right, next slide. So the next two slides basically just give you some information about enrollment from years past, obviously projections going forward. The top numbers obviously do not have early childhood and pre-K in them. Those numbers are down below. So that's what those make up to get to that 2113. And the next slide. And this is just the enrollment per school. So you can see the different projections in each of those from year to year in past and then going forward. High schools on top, EC through third grade is the next line, RIS at 453, and then junior high at the 347. So now the overall budget. The main, like I said, the main operating funds are the first three funds that you see. Those are totaled in column 4. So overall, in the operating funds, we're showing a deficit budget of a little over $856,000 for this school year. Keep in mind, $140,000 of that total are contingency funds. So if we don't need to use those funds, that number will drop by $140,000. And if no other major surprises show up, I'm hoping that number will end up closer to $500,000 or even less than that. So in each of the funds, you can see what those individual budgets and deficits are in the operating funds. Some of the ratios that not only Mr. Cox and I look at, but also the state or the fund balance to revenue ratio and the days cash on hand. For the operating funds, you can see that projected ending ratio would be 26%, and days cash on hand at 91. The state looks at basically a minimum of 25% and 90 days cash on hand. So in terms of the operating funds, we're just above. But if you look at the ed fund, if those numbers were to hold true, obviously we're at 23.7 on the fund balance to revenue and 83 days cash on hand. I'm going to move on to the next slide. This just gives you the history of some of those things. Obviously, the top line is based on a budget. All other lines are based on actual numbers. So basically, the last two columns are what I normally look at in terms of how we've done over the past few years. You can see last year that basically, well, let me back up. The budgeted FY21 number, that number in red, the $1.04. Basically, what that's telling you is that for every dollar of revenue coming in, you're spending $1.04. So then for the other years, you can see we've spent a little bit less than what we've taken in. You can go on to the next slide. And some of these slides I won't spend a lot of time on, but you can see in the individual revenue summary for the ed fund, 85% of our revenue comes from the levy and our general state aid or evidence-based funding. The next highest category is our federal funding at a little over $1 million. On the expenditure side in the ed fund, obviously you can see that salaries and insurance make up approximately 80% of that ed fund expenditure budget. And then some of the other items you can see there. On the O&M side of things, the levy is the main source of revenue in this fund. And other items obviously contribute to that, but the majority obviously comes from the real estate tax levy. On the expenditure side in the O&M, you can see that salaries and insurance only make up approximately 20% of this budget, Most of those expenses are coming out of the purchase service and supply line item of that particular budget. And on the supply line item, the utilities are the biggest cost of that $760,000 number. The utilities make up $553,000 of that total. On the revenue side for the transportation, you can see that regular and vocational reimbursements plus our tax levy are the majority of the revenue stream in that fund. And then on the expenditure side of things, you can see that salaries and insurance make up approximately about 64% of that budget, with capital outlay being next, which the capital outlay in that fund are the buses that we purchase each year. So these last two slides basically just break all of that down for the operating funds. On the revenue side of things, you can see that the tax levy and state funding make up 84% of that total revenue budgeted in the operating funds. And then on the expense side, again, you can see that salaries and insurance make up 73% of that total. And then some of those other categories that round out the operating expense budget. So are there any questions from the board that I can answer? All right, that's it for me.
Thanks, Bob. I am never envious of your job. Okay, so I'd open up to the board for discussion and questions. I didn't hear any just now. Okay, are there any public comments?
Christy?
Yeah.
Just a couple things to follow up with that came out of the Finance Committee meeting, especially for some of the public that may be listening in.
Do you want to do that?
One is that these enrollment numbers.
Sorry, I hear an echo.
I'll
do you want to do that in our meeting? Okay. Okay, then I just need a motion to close this meeting, the budget meeting.
So move.
Thank you. I have Bill with the motion to close and Dennis have the second. Thank you. Okay, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Great.
Aye.
Just say aye. Okay, thank you.
May I ask prior to the start of the board meeting if there's anybody that joined that would like to identify themselves?
Katie, do you need it? It's not just would you like to identify, they need to identify, right?
Yes, please. If there's anybody who has not identified themselves, please identify yourself.
Mm-hmm.
Somebody left. I guess they didn't want to identify themselves.
You may be muted, but you're more than welcome to use the chat function as well.
Yes.
I see none.
Okay. Hopefully they've all given me their name. Or they can still use that chat box to just type their name in if they haven't already stated they're attending the meeting for record. All right, we are ready to move ahead to our regular Board of Education meeting for the evening. Katie, will you please call roll?
Dr. Magoulias?
Yes.
Mr. Goebel?
Yes.
Mrs. Johnson?
Yes.
Mrs. Reynolds?
Here.
Mr. Yatoni?
Here.
Mr. Carley?
Here.
Mr. File?
Here.
Okay, we begin each meeting with a recognition of visitors. Are there any visitors on the call who would like to be recognized or have any comments?
Yes, this is Chris Jewell.
Thank you, Chris. Go ahead.
Yes, I just wanted to, first off, just thank the board and all the principals and the superintendent for all the hard work that has gone into the first, what seems like more than 5 weeks or so of school here for remote learning. And as we've heard sort of rumors or discussions as far as the end of the first quarter and transition back into the hybrid model, I don't want these things to sort of go unsaid. I definitely want my kids back in as soon as we can, as soon as possible. I just also want to make sure things are being done that are possible from the teachers' perspectives as well. And I guess I have a concern, and I'm sure that it's being looked at. I don't want it to go unsaid that teachers are being asked to do a lot in order to accommodate both in person at some point, as well as the potential for having a concurrent remote learning student, and the logistics of that, as well as sort of the check-in procedures. That I'm hoping that all those things are being done. I'm sure they're being done. I just don't want them to go unsaid, that the board doesn't think about those as well. So I appreciate the time. That's all I have.
Thank you. Is there anyone else? Okay. I have an email that came to Katie today. If there's someone else on the call who would like to make a comment, please enter your name in that chat box. I have one more to read. It's an email that came in today. So it's a longer one, and to stay within this 5-minute timeline, I'm going to be reading pretty quickly. It says, good evening. Thank you for your time and efforts. Please consider in-person learning for all students who wish to accept the minimal risk associated with attending school. We all take a variety of risks each and every day. There is risk associated with driving a car, crossing the street, using a cell phone, shopping at the grocery store, and even drinking too much water. At what point do district parents and children get to accept the minimal risk and go back to in-person learning? Is there a specific threshold being targeted that has not been publicly shared? We understand that there are many unknowns associated with COVID-19, but we also must understand that there are many unknowns about the adverse effects of remote learning, including but not limited to backsliding, depression, motivational issues, time management, developing oral skills, developing social skills, social isolation, etc. I remain confused about the timeliness of reviews and the ability to adapt in the myriad of remote learning plans provided by the district. Quote from cdc.gov website, school officials should make decisions about school reopening based on available data, including levels of community transmission and their capacity to implement appropriate mitigation measures in schools to protect students, teachers, administrators, and other staff. Schools should also consider other aspects of students' risk and well-being that arise when schools do not open for in-person classes. Then look at dph.illinois data, and then narrative on that data. We are on target or below for 3 of the 4 indicators, with the 4th indicator being classified as marginal. The data provides favorable numbers to go back to in-person learning. So my question is specifically, what is the Rochester district waiting for to begin in-person learning? How often is the data reviewed, and how quickly can we go back? Additionally, would 4 half-days for all students in the district help avoid many of the safety precautions that must be taken for a meal period? Are logistics around the lunch hour contributing to the delay in moving to in-person learning? Other area districts are having success with routine in-person learning, example 4 half-days. Have outdoor classroom options been considered? If we are truly interested in educating our children, why wouldn't we utilize the ample outdoor space we have at the various buildings? With each passing day, we are missing opportunities to positively impact the children. It is my hope that with the current encouraging data, the district responds quickly and efficiently. In addition to the Department of Public Health data, please be reminded of the data collected by the school district and the thought exchange completed this summer, July 2020. Which option would you prefer for your children as school reopens in the fall? Department of Public Health numbers are maintaining or below where they need to be. Families in the district responded overwhelmingly, 87%, that they wanted either a blended or full in-person instruction. What are we waiting for? The children we enrolled in Rochester Public Schools should not be adversely impacted simply because we chose to trust our public school system instead of moving to private school or to a different school district. Of course, allow the families who choose to take on remote schooling as an option to remain remote, but at least provide everyone with an option. To date, we have had no options. While our teachers are doing amazing work, this is tough on them too. I recognize and appreciate that reopening schools will be difficult, but let's take the steps. We understand it will be completely different than anything we have done before. Let's think outside the box. Do some class time outside before it gets too cold. We've had time to adjust to alternative schedules and additional safety measures. We will wear masks, work hard to keep our distance, take temperatures, wash hands, and do contact tracing. We can and will accept the minimal risk. Moving forward requires flexibility and understanding from parents, students, and families. However, it is not impossible. Together, we can do hard things. Let's do this for our children. Thank you for your time and efforts. I look forward to timely and informative updates. Kind regards, the Cheek family.
I have a text I'd like to share if I could that I got from one of our cafeteria workers. It's I'm just going to summarize it because it's pretty long, but basically describing all they're doing to put the free meals together. I mean, they're individualizing it, so they have to do like tiny little cups of mozzarella cheese, 5 carrots to a baggie, and each family got 4 breakfasts, 2 freezer meals, and a cold lunch. So basically it took them 3 days to put together 700 meals the first time, and of course now we have even more coming. But she ended it by saying, not only is the crew working really hard, but it looks like the parents are very happy with the items they are getting and how the district is handling it. So I thought we should all hear that positive feedback.
Thank you.
May I have the name of the person so I can put that in the minutes, please?
Sharon Seitz.
I'm sorry?
Sharon Seitz. She works for Aramark.
Thank you.
SCITZ.
And I want to recognize also in our Board of Education meeting tonight, many students that are on the call. Thank you for joining us. Sometimes these aren't quite so heavy, but you're seeing a heavy topic and issue tonight that affects all of you. So I think it's great that you're on the call tonight. Great assignment. Okay. With no more public comment that I see in the chat box or hearing from anybody, we'll move on to approval of the consent agenda. And I'll need a motion to approve the consent agenda, approval of minutes, approve disposal of verbatim closed session minutes of the September 17th, 2018 meeting, review of financial reports from organizations, and approval of reciprocal agreement between Rochester CUSD3A and Rochester Police Department.
So moved.
Thank you.
Second.
Thank you. Okay, Katie, please call the roll.
Dr. Magoulias?
Yes.
Mrs. Reynolds?
Yes.
Mr. Utoni?
Yes.
Mr. File?
Yes.
Mrs. Johnson?
Yes.
Mr. Goebel? Mr. Goebel?
Todd?
Mr. Goebel, can you hear us?
He just did a thumbs up.
Okay, excellent. And Mr. Carley?
Yes.
I can't, there it
Thank
is.
All right. Let's move on to financial reports and investment reports.
Okay, the investment report in your packet, you can see the overall balances. Obviously, the balances went up over last month. That's mainly due to a couple of our larger real estate tax payments coming in. So that's why you don't see a decline in balances for this particular time period. And then you can also see those individual interest rates and yields from some of those charts as well, which interest rates, as you know, still remain low and will be projected that way throughout the school year.
Okay. Are there any questions? I'll need a motion to approve the bills, payroll, and treasurer's report.
So moved.
Second.
Thank you. Okay, no questions on the bills? All right. Katie, call the roll, please.
Mr. Carley?
Yes.
Mrs. Johnson?
Yes.
Dr. Magoulias?
Yes.
Mr. File?
Yes.
Mr. Goebel?
Yes.
Mrs. Reynolds,
Yes.
Mr. Yatoni.
Yes.
Okay, a year-to-date fund summary report.
Fund summary, I will have a quarterly report for you guys next month. But basically, balances are following budgeted lines outside of some of the extra expenses we've had from COVID-related expenditures.
Okay. Any questions on the year-to-date fund summary? All right. Is there someone, Todd and Bill, you both serve on the Finance Committee meeting. Would one of you like to report on the Finance Committee meeting at this time?
I would just say the Finance Committee met, and almost all our discussion was a presentation on the budget by Mr. McDermott. And Todd, you want to add anything to that?
Just a couple things to follow up on the meeting that we just had before the meeting. One was that these enrollment numbers are something that we really all ought to take very specific note of, because they're shockingly low, and the trend of where they're going, it matters because ago when we were decisions about making the direction of the district and referendums and building committee making decisions, those decisions based on enrollments that at the time were around 200 students higher than they are now, and we're projected to be 350 students lower than where we were at our peak. At the time, we were bursting at the seams, but this is something that future boards are going to need to continue to take a very close look at, because we're constantly trying to predict what are we going to look like as a district 5-10 years out, and it's very hard to do that. And that illustrates also why the board has to work hand in hand with the village and the city. We can do everything we can do to be an attractive place to move, so that if you want to move your kids into the Rochester district, but there has to be because without future development, we're going to have long-term issues that we're going to have to deal with. That was one thing. The second thing I wanted to bring up that really wasn't fleshed out was that a lot of Bob's numbers can go one direction or the other, pretty wide swing with residential placement. And that was something that we spent a little more time at the meeting talking about at our committee meeting, because some of these residential placement figures per student, 6 figures, one student. And so if a student's in your district, that can be a very expensive situation that you have to deal with. And if a student decides to graduate or move out, it can change the numbers drastically. And then we also spent a little bit of time talking about College Now, more so than we did at our meeting. At the Finance Committee, we talked about the fact that as a board and involving the teachers and teacher leadership, we're going to have, and it's not today, but that's an issue that is right for a more thorough discussion. It affects the budget, but it affects lots of other moving parts and other committees that we're going to have to deal with those issues as they come up on our agenda.
You make a really good point that I just want to check and clarify what we might be able to do as a school board to increase the communication that we have with the village as we're talking about the development of residential areas and bringing more living places, living homes into our district.
at the committee level, we really talk much about that. And that's, that's something that our superintendents have historically done to try to just maintain that open door policy of communication. And that I know Mr. Cox is aware of that, one of the many hats that he wears. I think that everybody district understands the role that the school plays in people's decision to move here. It's certainly not because industry. We're very much a bedroom community, and we've embraced that. The school's the number one thing we got going. We just need some developers to decide that they're ready to pull the trigger.
That's going to be hard to do because Sangamon County has lost population the last 4 years. So, I mean, the trend is really bad. So it's going to be difficult times.
Okay.
Anyway, it's just important that everyone keeps, is something that we're all aware of, not just at the committee level. That's all.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Okay, administrator reports. There are director's reports and administrator principal reports in your packet. Are there any questions from any board members for any of the directors or principals reports that you have? Okay. If I hear none, then I'll ask Mr. Cox for his superintendent's report this evening.
All right, thank you. Everybody hear me okay? All right, Didn't get kicked off the mic yet. First off, I would like to just recognize and celebrate our school district as a whole. Rochester 3A has been named a top 100 school district in Illinois by Niche. With a ranking of 45 statewide out of well over 800. I don't know our top number now as a state, but I think we have close to 840, give or take, school districts in the state. And this is a direct result of our dedicated and talented teachers, staff, students, and community that results in great schools. It takes everyone working together. Great schools have great teachers, they have great leaders, they have great community members and families, and all of those people working together result in the schools that we have. So that is something to celebrate. Our pre-kindergarten program has started their program full and in person with a successful transition. Really hats off to our pre-K teachers, our aides, Mr. Reed, Mrs. Ross, Mrs. Shaw, all getting the logistics going to get our youngest students back in school. Last week, whenever they came, it was a big celebration. It felt good to see kids getting off the bus and coming into school. And I will say of note, interestingly enough, this was the first time in my career that I did not see any tears from pre-kindergarten students on the first day of school. They were all excited and bouncing up and down to come in. Now, there may have been a tear or two from some parents pulling away, but our young ones, they were okay. They were doing well, and so far, so good there. And then also, just hats off to everyone in our schools who continue to work to build up to and serve more students in person. Anything from opening up our libraries for students who need internet access, to starting our students with special needs who have been coming in now for a few weeks, students with interventions. We're starting labs. Today we had our drumline, some of our band sectionals, the madrigal sectionals were in school today. It was great to hear music back on campus again, along with the things that we've been doing with some of our extracurriculars. So slowly but surely we continue to serve more and more children and students, and we'll talk about that in much more detail on the agenda item. Our free breakfast and lunch program, Mrs. Reynolds had mentioned that earlier about how that's going. Now, just for everybody's information, we are able to serve, and we have a waiver through the federal government to serve free lunch and breakfast to any child ages 1 to 18 that comes to our schools. And what I mean by comes to our school, not a resident or not a student in our school, it just means If you show up and you're between the ages of 1 and 18, you are able to receive a meal free of charge, both breakfast and lunch. Last week, we served over 12,000 meals.
Wow.
In 1 week's time, we served over 12,000 meals, and it was enough food for 7 days per week. It's really, really amazing what our team was able to do. So it's a huge celebration, but also a significant undertaking to prepare and get all those meals distributed. This next piece of my report, I want to just emphasize at the beginning, I'm approaching this potential opportunity with cautious optimism. Tomorrow, on Tuesday, I have a meeting scheduled with the University of Illinois about the possibility of implementing a pilot testing program at Rochester schools. This would be a rapid response COVID testing program for all students and staff. That's saliva testing with a turnaround time of 6 to 8 hours. Again, I have cautious optimism with this, as it is a critical component of not only getting our children in school, but keeping them in school and identifying and being able to isolate and quarantine populations who may be at risk so we can continue to move forward. It's also important as we get kids in school, it's a big component for us to be able to increase the time that we spend in school. There are some significant logistical issues we have to clear. And then the most significant issue we have to clear would be the cost that comes with this test. So I'm hopeful to learn more tomorrow about what this will look like. But I do know that the University of Illinois is very measured and very methodical about their rollout of this program. They're looking at expanding it and offering it statewide, but before they do that, they're looking at specific school districts to be partners in that program, and they've reached out to us, and we've been recommended as a potential partner for a myriad of reasons. Our proximity to the lab sites, which will be at University of Illinois Springfield, they will be at SIUC School of Medicine, along with the courses we have in place here. Are there any questions on that piece before I move on?
Can I just throw in a
Not only
comment on
students,
it?
but what about teachers?
Both staff and students, Mr. File.
Okay. Because our concern, we can't, a teacher goes out, we've got substitution problems, so yeah.
I was
Amy?
just gonna say, I was interviewed by WSMI about this because Greenville is one of the pilot universities using it. And as a U of I alum and the parent of a student at Greenville, they thought it'd be fun to get my perspective on it. And I other than the cost and any other issues that you see we have to go over, I think it'd be a great idea. You get the results in 4 hours. It's all you do is spit into a little test tube. It's not like that painful nasal swab, which I've had to go through once. I think it'd be great for our staff and our students if we could overcome the hurdles that are in the way.
I will say I am at UIS right now while we have this meeting where I work. And so I've done the saliva test weekly this semester. It's not a little bit of saliva.
Well, have you ever done a genealogy? You have to put a whole lot more in there for a genealogy. My daughter's had to do both.
Yeah.
And she said it's hard. She had to hardly put any in there compared to the genealogy.
So let's keep looking at the option and then, consider that what it really is going to take. Sometimes the results come back in a day. Sometimes it takes a few days. So it's good to keep looking at this as an option.
Absolutely. And then I just wanted to mention surplus equipment. The old bus number 10 has been donated to the fire department for training purposes. The history with this bus was we were going to attempt to trade it in, and whenever the vendor came to pick it up, I think the transmission blew on it not too far down the road, and they hauled it back to us. And we've since tried to sell it for parts and sell it to anybody who might be interested, to no avail, and the fire department was interested. So we have donated that to them. And that will be it for this part of the report.
Okay. All right, we'll move on to old business. I'll need a motion to approve the fiscal year 21 budget.
So moved.
Thank you. Second? Todd, second? Are there any additional questions on the budget? Katie, please call the roll.
Mr. Utoni,
Yes.
Mrs. Reynolds,
Yes.
Mr. File,
Yes.
Dr. Magoulias,
Yes.
Mrs. Johnson,
Yes.
Mr. Goebel,
Yes.
Mr. Carly.
Yes.
Thank you.
Do we have to sign this tomorrow?
As soon as everybody could come in to sign the budget, please do so, because we do have to file that at our clerk's offices and with the Illinois State Board of Education. I should have said this earlier too, and I'll be brief. I want to thank Mr. McDermott for his work on the budget every year. It's important. This year it couldn't be more important, not only for me being a new superintendent, but also as we're dealing with our response to the COVID pandemic. It's really, Bob's work has allowed me to focus on what we're doing with schools, and he's kept me up to date, and we've been talking about what we need to do. So thank you, Mr. McDermott. This is job well done.
Agreed.
I'll be there tomorrow morning to sign it.
Thank you.
Okay, next we have the Board of Education committee assignments. I worked on this with Mr. Cox. There's a few changes in this as we welcome Mr. Carly to our board and look at his areas of expertise and just different needs of different board members. There was some movement. Well, as the board president, I'll tell you, I don't know that I'll be able to attend every single meeting like my predecessor. It just doesn't fit into my life like that. But I'll do my best to make it to many. So you'll see when you look at that there's just kind of a more muted orange color, meaning I can serve on that committee and I may be in attendance, but it doesn't mean that I'll be at every meeting for each of those committees. I did put myself on the interview committee with Mr. Cox. As we talked about that, there are some things that we'd like to just kind of smooth the way our interviews are working and look at what's coming up. So I'll be serving on the interview committee and just made a couple other shifts. Is there any question from anybody on those or any discussion? Okay. And then we have the discussion of transition to a hybrid. Mr. Cox, would you like to get us started on this? About our hybrid instruction model.
Yes. So I'm going to walk the board really through some of the principles we've been following, where we've been and why, where we are, where we're going, and what's changed to allow us to continue to move forward from a remote learning model into what would be our hybrid instructional model. First, the principles that we have been following remain the same. They've served us well, and we're going to continue to adhere to those. And that's the general health, safety, and welfare of our overall school community, and that we will continue to communicate clearly and often, and that we will provide for the continuity of learning. Those are the three principles that we started out with this, and they were the principles that we will continue to move forward with. In addition to that, as we communicated whenever we went to remote instruction, we do believe that our staff members are our most valuable asset to increase student educational outcomes, and we will maximize in-person instruction to the greatest extent possible while keeping the general health, safety, and welfare of our school community a top priority. All efforts will be made to the greatest extent possible to adhere to the Illinois Department of Public Health, Illinois State Board of Education, and Sangamon County Health Department guidelines to avoid cancellations or mandated closures. And health guidelines and the overall safety of our school community will guide decisions to establish a safe and effective learning environment for students, staff, and families as we navigate this pandemic. And as we all know, and we're very well aware, we started the school year off with remote instruction. And before I go any further, I want to recognize the work of everyone that has been involved in that, from our staff, our teachers, our administrators within the schools, our students who have been working with us and been incredibly patient and trying their best, and our families who have been outstanding partners in education. They have supported us. There's absolutely, on all parties, us included, frustration, but we continue to move forward and work together the best that we can. Our families have been great partners. We want them to continue to do so. Our teachers have been excellent voices at the table, and working to make what we're doing work and continue to move forward, as have our administrators and the rest of our staff. Our transition to hybrid timeline that we're looking at and we'll be discussing this evening. At the outset of remote learning, our goal was to continue to increase the amount of time. It was not going to be all or nothing. I think I've said that multiple times of, unlike the spring where we shut our campus down, this fall we would still have an active campus. That was first demonstrated by our extracurricular activities continuing to be held to what extent we were able to hold them and be in line with the guidance. We also opened up our libraries, and then we started to serve our pre-K programs, any students in need of intervention, any students in need of special services, special education, we began to bring on campus. We have since expanded that to some of our fine arts activities, as I highlighted earlier, along with looking at starting some of our lab courses. Our next step is then to, on September 14th, we began our pre-kindergarten programs in full, 5 days per week. We also had students in kindergarten through 6th grade receiving special education services beginning. On September 28th, and I think there's a lot of people looking forward to this, on September 28th, we have already communicated with our kindergarten families that kindergarten students will begin the blended in-person remote instruction at 50% capacity. So our kindergarten students will have 2 days per week in person, and then they will have their 3 days per week of remote. That was in line with our original plan. On October 5th, due to the changing health and safety considerations, along with progress we've been able to make from an instructional model, on October 5th, I'm prepared to recommend that all students in 1st through 12th grade will begin in-person instruction in the blended remote model at 50% capacity. There are a couple of items I'd like to touch on about how we have gotten here and why we are ready and prepared to be ready to move forward into our hybrid instruction model. First are the health and safety conditions. Bear with me just 1 second. Okay, first are the health and safety conditions. Since the time the district made the decision to begin school under remote learning or the remote instruction model, we've made several developments and changing conditions that now allow us to begin to transition to hybrid instruction. One of the things that's a big factor from a health safety standpoint, a community health safety standpoint, is we now have metrics. Not only do we have metrics specifically for schools that were released by the Illinois Department of Public Health and the Illinois State Board of Education, but we also have better local data. At the time we went remote instruction, we were not receiving regular updated local data about what was going on in our community. We also have data about what's happening in our schools based on what we know today. And then of course we have the metrics from the Illinois Department of Public Health. Where we are with the the school related metrics, we are at the lowest indicator in level blue, which would be minimal community transmission. That's as low as we can go from a metric standpoint as it currently exists today. In addition to that, our overall state data, I looked at that today. It's below 4% of community spread. Our county data and our local data in our own school system are within range to begin in-person instruction. Keeping track with our own data, and I failed to mention this in my previous report, in the superintendent's report folder, you received a slide of our own local school data related to some of the COVID issues we're tracking. You also received enrollment data. That'll be a regular part. The enrollment and the COVID data will be a regular part of your monthly update for the foreseeable future. Currently, of our local data, starting from August 18th, whenever we started transitioning people back into school, so this does not include June, July, in the early part of August. Beginning on August 18th, we currently, as of this writing, we had three staff quarantined presently. I will tell you how quickly this can change. That number 3 was on Friday. Today on Monday, I believe we had 8 to 9. I'd have to go back and look, but we had 8 to 9 staff members quarantined today. Total number of positive staff has been 0. Total number of staff quarantined is 27. Number of in-person work days lost to date are 98. One asterisk that needs to be by that number, thus far, we've been able to allow everyone to work remotely, specifically teachers who have been quarantined have been able to continue to work remotely. They just have not been here in person. Total number of positive students is 7. Again, the asterisk that goes with this data right now is it's the 7 that we know of because we've been able to track them because of their participation in athletics. There could be more that we're not aware of. Without people being in school, we don't always have the ability to know. With those 7 positives, what I can tell you about that, through our contact tracing, none of them were related to the actual sports. The positives came from things outside of the school setting. The total number of students who have been quarantined is 39. Our total number of COVID positive, of course, is 7. And then our total number of COVID positive cases presently is 0. The next piece that we've been able to do since the start of the recommendation for remote learning is we've been able to develop thorough health safety plans here locally. And not only have we been able to develop them, we've been able to put them to practice and work on them. I want to give hats off to our nurses, all of our nurses, for the contact tracing job that they do. Not everyone is aware of this, but the health department is overwhelmed to the point they are not able to complete the contact tracing as quickly and as thoroughly as we would like here in the school setting, because our nurses have been trained, and some of them, specifically Heather, has been a contact tracer. We're able to conduct our own contact tracing and work hand in hand with the health department through that, which has allowed us to move more quickly and accurately while we're dealing with any potential cases of COVID. We have enhanced our pre-screen procedures and are in the middle of doing that as we speak. Early on, we just did a verification where we sent a form to everyone and said, please agree that you will do this every day. We are now with employees requiring a daily pre-screen to be completed through our Skyward system, and we are moving that into our student population as they return back to school. Our pre-K students are completing that now, or our pre-K families are completing that now and going through the checklist of any potential symptoms for COVID. Note that any students who do not complete, or families who do not complete the screening, those students will be placed outside of the classroom until our nurses can physically screen them. So that's an enhancement of something we have done from the beginning. Our in-person student services, including extracurricular activities, has resumed and gradually increased with success. We've been able to obtain PPE and cleaning supplies. That's been a significant challenge. We did not have many things in place at the time we were ready to start school, not because it was not for a lack of trying. Just obtaining PPE and other cleaning items have been incredibly difficult because the demand, the supply does not meet the demand, and plus the back order is so significant. In fact, we're in need of more towers, more hand sanitizer towers. We have the towers, 15 of them, but the dispensers have not shown up yet. Would just be one example. They are on the way. We did get that confirmed, and they're red and green, so we'll be ready for Christmas whenever they get here. So if you see red and green sanitizers, it's just the best we could get for stations. We have visible safety reminders such as signage in place. Our health institutions have been able to provide an increased level of support, and our testing capabilities have increased as well as a community, and potential locally for our school district to increase those even more so. In terms of instruction, we did start remote learning first and foremost and primarily because of health safety trends. At the time, our data, we were below 5%, but our data was indicating that we would go up above 5 and increase above that, and that happened. We got above 6% in this community specifically. That has since trended back down, and the trend is good, as I indicated earlier. So we did have health and safety considerations we were making, but we also had instructional considerations that we were making. It's an incredibly large and difficult task to just completely transform an instructional model that we've been doing for all of our careers and then some. At that time, we decided to go remote only and provide the best level of success that we could for teachers, students, and families by focusing on remote instruction only, with the intent of increasing the time we spend of in-person instruction as quickly as we can and as safely as we can. We said we would evaluate at the middle of the quarter, which we did. We actually started bringing kids in at that time, and that we would look at going to our hybrid model by the second quarter. If data is better, we can go quicker. If data was worse, we would go more slowly. At this point in time, I do want to emphasize that these are still fluid plans, and anything can cause us to move to increased in-person instruction, but we could also certainly take steps backwards to more remote instruction as well. Our goal is to continue, once we get students in school, is to keep them in school. That has been a huge purpose of our methodical approach as we went through these first few weeks of school. Having time to focus solely on remote instructions provided us with valuable time to better learn how to best serve our students, and having time to focus solely on the instruction, having time to solely focus on that instruction. In doing so, we provided our staff with 44 hours of professional learning on Canvas and remote instruction through the distance learning playbook. And we've also provided courses that we have not measured yet of the hours of ISTE micro courses. They're just a remote course that allows teachers some extra professional learning opportunities. To put that in perspective, those 44 hours we've been able to provide thus far is almost half of an entire professional development cycle for 3 years. So we have the whole first week of school that we took, the 7 days we took with teachers only before we brought students in, was put to good use. Not to understate that there's certainly going to be more time needed as we move forward. Our families have been offered some learning opportunities on Canvas, and we've also offered opportunities through remote learning. We did have partners such as the University of Illinois Springfield, who are providing remote learning opportunities for our families. I know there was just something offered maybe last week, and we did have some families that did participate in that. Continued learning and development will be a priority for the district. So moving into the specifics of what it will look like as we transition to our blended remote program. In the summer, the board approved a 4-model plan. We approved our in-person instruction with limited remote. We did in-person instruction with blended hybrid at 50% capacity, which is what we're discussing this evening. We approved remote only, which is where we started, and the board approved then an elective. Well, at that time, they approved an elective remote only. I will note at this time that is not an option. It's a mandate. We must offer a remote only option, but at the time we approved our plan, that was not a requirement. So we were ahead of the curve to a degree there. In accordance with our plan, our students will attend in-person learning 2 days per week. Students will be divided into 2 groups by alphabet with a split schedule. Students with the last names beginning with the letters A through K will attend in person on Tuesdays and Wednesdays. Students with the last names L through Z will attend in-person learning on Thursdays and Fridays. Students will continue to receive remote instruction when they're not scheduled for in-person learning. And every Monday will continue to serve as a remote learning day for the majority of our students. Students are divided alphabetically so that families in the same household are on the same schedule. And we've also taken into account that students living within the same household who may be blended families will be kept in the same cohort regardless of last names, so that we can try to keep our families on the same schedules. On Mondays, whenever it's remote only for the vast majority of our students, otherwise we called at Rockets Anywhere as a remote learning venue, that instruction will take place from 8 to 1:30 in the form of synchronous instruction, asynchronous instruction, projects, and assignments. Certain students will attend in-person learning on Mondays, such as our pre-K would be an example. We may have some special populations that would need to attend there as well. Families of students who need to attend in-person instruction on Mondays have already been contacted individually, or as we increase that, will be contacted individually in the future. In terms of the elective remote only instruction, our school district will be providing and continuing to provide an elective remote only option. A survey shortly after we announce to families tomorrow, we will send a survey out to all families asking them some transportation questions, but we will also be asking families to re-indicate if they are going to choose the remote only option or not. Anyone who chooses the remote only model will remain in that model for the remainder of the semester. At the beginning of the second semester, they can choose to come back for in-person or hybrid instruction. Students and families may opt into remote learning at any time with administrative approval. During this time, we will still continue with instructional workloads with synchronous instruction, asynchronous instruction, projects, assignments, quizzes, tests. Attendance and participation is required, and traditional district grading policies will be followed. There are a couple areas where elective remote only are not possible, and that's our Capital Area Career Center. You cannot be a remote only learner, and then also our behind the wheel driver education. Students will have to come in person or wait in order to do those things. And then last but not least, face coverings are still required and will be adhered to. And I can personally say from witnessing myself, our pre-kindergarten students are doing excellent at wearing their masks. So I'm confident everybody else will be too.
Thank you so much, Mr. Cox, for going through the details for that. I know probably many of our board members have questions or comments. To try to keep this so we're not talking over each other, it's so much easier in person, isn't it? But instead of doing that, can I just go down the list that I'm seeing as tiles if you're ready? Okay, I see a thumbs up from a couple people. Is there? Great. So I think I've seen thumbs up from everyone. Mr. Goebel, do you want to start? Can we hear you? He froze on me. I'm going to come back to him.
There. Can you hear me now?
I can, yep.
All right. Thanks. Our meeting, reading an email from somebody, and it made a lot of good points. I want to recognize that the teachers, and there aren't very many on the meeting today, but I know some are, and I know that we have our administrators on the call. I recognize that this entire summer, or actually going back to last year, has felt like just a daily crisis. And there's been, I would certainly feel frustrated with the moving target. But when I was asked whether I would be supportive of going back to in-person learning, my response was I couldn't be stronger in favor of it. I had a conversation with I wish I could remember exactly when it was. I was at Humphreys and ran into Jamie Tolan, and he was talking about constantly having to come up with a new plan and not knowing if the plan that they were going to come up with was a plan that was going to be rolled out at the start of school, because this was before we made the decision, the advice of Mr. Cox, to start. I think at the time, I was a little bit skeptical is not the right word, but maybe not as quickly to get on board with that idea until it was explained to me that by going full remote early, we're giving the teachers and the administrators as much time as we can, given when we're making that decision, to be the best that they can be, with the alternative being try and start hybrid and not know what that's going to look like or how long it's going to last. And I look back at that decision, and it was the right one, and it would have been an even better decision if we had the data to make that decision earlier in the summer. With that said, I think that my conversations with Mr. Tolan at the time were that we know that all these plans that we're trying to come up with are going to be used at some point. And I'm paraphrasing here, he said it better than I did. It's just a matter of when we're going to be rolling this out. So I know that October 5th seems like it's coming up on us really fast. I have a lot of confidence in our administrators and in our teachers, and it's not going to be fun. Hybrid learning is going to be, frankly, miserable. It might turn out to be just as miserable as remote learning. it may actually turn out to be more miserable than remote learning. But it's necessary to go through to get back to in-person learning, because the only time school is going to get fun again, where you have sports and band and the little things, just the conversation that teachers have with students before instruction starts, and the conversations that they have after, and the conversations that kids have in the passing periods. My children took that for granted. They had no idea how much they missed school until it was taken from them. And what we need to do as fast as we can, and I say as fast as we can, as safe and as flexibly, keeping in mind that we have to stay flexible. With those three goals, we have the goal of getting back in-person learning, not just on a hybrid model, but eventually we want to go back to normal. That's what we all want. So we're never going to be 100% sure if October 5th is the right day, or if September 5th would have been the right day, or if December 5th is the right day. We're never going to have that much clarity. But I think we have a lot more clarity today than we did at the beginning of July, which is why I'm so I don't want this to sound overconfident, because it's not. I recognize that this is going to be hard, and we're still going to feel like we're in crisis mode, and we're constantly going to be evaluating the situation. But I have 100% confidence that the team that we have is going to make this work, and that this is enough time to get it done. And I've gone on for too long already. I apologize for droning, but thank you.
Thank you, Todd. Don, you're next on my tile list here.
Okay. Obviously, there are no easy decisions, and I first want to thank you, Dan, for all of your hard work, you and the rest of the staff. I think the work you've done over the summer and the first 5 weeks of school has been heroic. I know how hard the teachers have worked over the weekend, sending videos to the kids, reassuring them, and it's truly appreciated by this parent, and I know everyone in the community that I've had a chance to talk to. I think the reality is there is no crystal ball, and I think Todd said it well. We won't know what choices we make are the right ones for our students, and I think your decision to err on the side of caution from a health safety perspective of the teachers and the students was the right one. And as we look forward to the fall, I think moving iteratively into an in-person learning as you learn to go back to school with the kids in the classroom during a pandemic is the right one. And it sounds like you have the right protocols and procedures in place to keep the teachers and the kids safe. One thing I was concerned with and listened to intently is what's changed since you made the decision to keep the kids home. And I know that the teachers are in the classrooms working remotely and working well into the evenings, but I appreciate you taking the time to share with us your plans and all of the steps you've taken and what's changed on the ground with the greater testing, greater supplies, which is really pretty surprising. It's hard to get soap and hand sanitizer, but I know it is. So all of those new process and procedures you have in place are tremendous and really reassuring. I think also the fact that you've moved some children into the classroom, for madrigals. My girls were there today and had a great time. I attended a cross-country meet today, and everybody really enjoys the opportunity to get together for those extracurriculars. So I think I'm 100% supportive of moving back 50% time October 1st for the remainder of the kids in the school, and I know they're all excited about it. So I really want to thank you for the great work, and I appreciate your thoughtful comments about what's changed and the decision you're making today. I know it's a tough one, so thank you so much, and thanks to all the administrators.
Amy Reynolds. Thank you, Mr. Carley.
I have a question and then I have a comment. So I'll ask the question and let you answer it first, if that's okay, and then give my comment. And so my question was, and I suspect there are parents out there wondering this, if we do have to quarantine, do we have any idea, like, I'm assuming at the younger grades, we'll maybe able to isolate just a classroom and for how long? Like we want to know how many will have to be quarantined and for how long. And I know you can't give hard and fact, black and white, but if you could give just an approximate.
I do have that, and if I was sitting in my office, I could flip to it and tell you exactly, because we've made a little one-page flip chart to look at all that. But we do have exclusions, and the answer is it depends on the situation, and it depends on the contact tracing. It could be to where we're just quarantining a couple of kids. It could be where we're quarantining an entire classroom, or it could be where we're having to shut a school down into remote learning. Because of what it is. So there are specific guidelines that we work with through our health department, and we work with through locally as how we would do that. And it changes. And here's the other hard part about that question is the guidance is changing on us regularly. Sometimes it changes within the same week. The last time the guidance changed, I believe it was 2 weeks ago, we received updated guidance from the local health department, and then we received updated guidance from the Illinois Department of Public Health, and there were 3 direct contradictions between the two that were significant. Significant enough that the one from the Illinois Department of Public Health, it has to do with mask to mask, which I won't get into the details of that, but it's mask to mask exposure. But if we follow that, it's going to be very, very difficult to be able to keep people in school. So we talked to our own health department about that and was looking for a stance and which one to follow. And the response we received was, well, you need to do what's best for your school district. So we're not only is the guidance changing, it's really up to us to determine that guidance, which is a very difficult position to be in as educators, as we're not only getting the guidance, but we're being forced to interpret that. So that's why at times we're taking our time working through some of the health safety guidelines.
I think even that there's some parents needed to hear, so thank you. So my comments are that we as Rochester always said, we want to do what's best for kids. And I was thrilled that we were at a point in the summer where we were going to give the choice, because I think that parents that have situations where there's more high risk in the home or have more fears should have had the choice to be remote only. But I was huge on parents having a choice to have their kids be in person. I worry about the social emotional in a huge way. As somebody I was talking to with one day said, why is the student who might be considering suicide's life worth any less than the one that might die of COVID? Because you've got issues and fears both ways. And I'm a big proponent that as Americans, we've always been willing to assume a little bit of risk for freedom, the freedom to go to school. The only reason I was supportive of when we switched to remote only, and this is something I wish the public had heard, I don't think that all of our parents heard this, was because of the rules and guidelines we were going to have to follow to send kids home if they had even one symptom, a runny nose, a headache, an upset stomach, a sneeze. If we were going to have to send them home for those symptoms, they weren't going to be in person anyway. And that's why I was supportive of us going to all remote. So I am super excited about the idea of us going back to the hybrid and letting families that want their kids be in person have that option. I recognize it's going to be a lot of hard work for our staff. I wish I could wave a magic wand and make that go away. Although I do think a lot of our staff is looking forward to seeing those students again. All the extra work our staff's putting in this year, cover your ears, Bob. I wish we could afford to pay them double for the year, but we can't. So all we can do is do our best to let them know we support them. We recognize their extra work. We strongly appreciate it. And we think that this is what is best for kids.
Thank you, Amy. Amy Johnson, you're up next.
Well, I won't repeat, although I share the sentiments of everyone before me, that I appreciate all that you have done, the work that has gone into it. I appreciate hearing details tonight that make it evident you've been thoughtful and reasoned through the hiccups that we know are yet to come. My first concern and thought was what has changed since August, and understanding as you said, that we now have metrics we didn't have, we have details and we have better data. Again, it all is a lot of common sense as to why we can progress now to get the kids back into school. I share Mr. Goebel's concern that this is not perhaps going to be the perfect solution. And I hope that our families continue to be patient with the teachers and with the staff, because we will continue to have hiccups that we have to overcome. We are starting over now for the first time in a hybrid learning situation, and there will be things we need to learn. And we're still going to have students and staff coming in with common seasonal issues and flu symptoms, and we're still going to be working through that. That will put a lot of work on the nurses and on the families in self-reporting those things. I have concerns for the teachers, just knowing how much that they've already put into it. And again, for them as well, they are starting over now for the first time in a hybrid setting. But I wholeheartedly agree that it is time to do this. I know my children want to be back there. I want them to be back there. And it seems that with all the data that we have now, we are taking a reasonable risk for those families who opt to move to hybrid. And I continue to understand the families who, for their particular situations, have decided it's best that they stay remote. So I thank you to Mr. Cox, all the teachers, and everyone who have worked so hard to get us to this point. And I am cautiously optimistic that we'll continue into the schools and not have to go back to a full remote. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Johnson. Okay, Mr. File, you're up next.
All the work that's been done is terrific. I think we're on the right thing to do it gradually. I think the things said already are I would agree with it. I didn't hear anything I would disagree with. I have been quarantined. I know what the public health department did. I've been around people that have been quarantined, and the rules don't match. Depending on who you are and who you get your call from, what you're told is different. There's a lot of searching and bumbling in that part, and what Mr. Cox said about getting conflicting rules. I think we got more to come. As far as I think we have to do it this way because the 6 foot social distancing is an issue, and of course the cafeteria, and so just moving through those, taking a little bit of time looks like the right thing to do. So I'm wholeheartedly in favor of this, because every person I talk to who's got kids in school is interested in getting them back, and some of those were scared to death of what they might carry home, but that has abated to a large extent. I haven't heard anybody lately so wary of that, because the scare is kind of wearing off a little bit. I think with experience, people are seeing the things that we're seeing. So I think, thanks teachers, thanks Mr. Cox. I thank all the school people, and this is what, I was in Missouri, and there's a whole different attitude over there. Their schools are open, they're playing football with people in the stands, and you see that, you just get homesick, and you think, why? You know, they seem to be persevering, and they're 3 or 4 weeks into it without any problems that are on TV, and I'm sure if there were, TV would report them. So that's all I want to say, I guess. I appreciate all the work, though.
Thank you, Mr. File. Mr. Utoni?
Yeah, I agree with everything's been said. I just had a question about the 1st through 5th grade. Why are they starting a week after the kindergarten? What's the reason for that week?
We had started talking about getting the kindergarten going quite some time ago. We started on the kindergarten logistics much earlier than we did the other. And at this point now, where we are logistically to get our transportation routes scheduled, knowing the kids who are going to be on the bus, because every time we tweak or change these plans, Brenda has to redo the transportation, and the other one's making sure we get the food in hand and all ready to go in the cafeteria procedures, giving principals and teachers just that time to go. We just started a little earlier with kindergarten than we did the others.
Okay, thanks.
Oh, Mr. Utoni?
Yes.
Or the rest of the board. A couple other pieces to that too. I forgot on the kindergarten as well. One of the significant reasons we are looking at starting kindergarten earlier always as well, one, just their age. I think we know remote learning is not ideal for kindergartners, but also they are the only grade level we did not issue devices to. We did offer to give devices to those families, iPads, not Chromebooks, and that's another reason we wanted to get them back in there. It's just not, kindergarten's not been conducive to remote learning at all. They are our most vulnerable students, so we wanted to get them in more quickly, and then the device issue is a part of that. And we did start talking about that earlier and logistic wise.
Okay, I think it's my turn. And I know that, I'll say I, had no idea in discussions this summer that I'd be a school board president during this, these decisions and everything that needs to be done. And I'll tell you that I have carried the weight of representing the board and the district in every conversation I've had with Mr. Cox. And we've talked multiple times, daily, really, over the last couple or few weeks. And so he's heard a lot of my questions, and it's also been an honor to be his sounding board for representative for the district. So I just want to note that, and I'm grateful for the opportunity, and I don't take it lightly. I've asked him a lot of questions over the last couple weeks. Every time he'd say, a new plan or a new movement or something else, I'd say we have to answer the question, why? Why are we doing this? What's next? Why are we making this decision at this time? What makes this okay now? What can we do more? Why not? Why aren't we doing more? I've asked him the hard question about why can't we go in 4 days? And I know the answer already, but we have to be prepared, I think, to answer that question for our community, because as we move to this hybrid model, I think the next bit of pressure is going to be to keep sliding into even more time on campuses for our students. And we have to follow the guidelines that are presented to us as best as we can. And our district model and the number of students we expect to take the hybrid option and our district setup does not allow us to do more than this 50% hybrid option that we have in order to follow the guidelines right now. I know this is really hard for teachers. I'm a teacher in training and spent many years teaching, and I can imagine how challenging this is going to be, but we can do this, and it's what we have to do now to keep moving forward, because the metrics have changed. The data has changed. We are ready to move forward. There's nothing that's holding us back other than ourselves right now. So synchronous and asynchronous meeting, some remote students in each grade level, a big number of hybrid students we're anticipating in each grade level. This is our new reality. And when I think back, I think, healthcare workers didn't have a lot of options when they were thrown into this. Essential workers didn't really get much of a say and didn't have a lot of options. Many parents felt like they didn't have the options that they wanted. And everyone made it work and put their all into whatever was presented to them. So in education, that's where we are now. That's what we have to move on to next. And as a board, I know we'll be there to support our administrators and our teachers. I have a lot of confidence in the people we have in this district to be able to do this and do it well. And it's not going to be easy, but I was thinking hybrid is new. Well, a few weeks ago, remote was new. And I think you've done a great job with it. Before that, block scheduling was new at one point. Before that, departmentalizing our upper elementary grades was new at one time. Everything is new. We can do this. We're good, and we can do this. I think we have a few quirks to work out still. I have a couple questions that I can ask if you don't mind. I do want to point out too, 44 hours of professional development for our teaching staff. Not only is that almost half of their 3-year cycle of professional development required for their license, that is also more contact hours than an entire 3-credit course at a university. So if they were taking a course on remote instruction, a 3-credit course at the graduate level, they would have had less contact hours than 44 in that course. So that's the preparation that they've been given. and hopefully taken advantage of. 3 quick questions. Can I ask Dan? Okay. Just a clarification for anyone listening or anyone who hears the recording. When you say households, kids in one household will all go on the same days. And my household is an example. I have an F and an M. So my oldest is an F. Will my children go on the day of the oldest child's last name?
That's a good question. That one I don't know. What the determination is, which side they're going to be on. So I'm going to have to find out that answer.
I guess that is a new one. I haven't asked you that one yet.
No, you haven't asked me. She has asked me a lot of questions. That's not one you've asked me, but I will find out that one.
So it's something I think parents will be curious about quickly so that they can start looking and planning. The questionnaire that goes to each student's family about hybrid or remote option, I know that will come from the district office. Can we please make sure that principals send that out also to families, students' families, emails? And also maybe we can ask our teachers if they do weekly announcements or if they send something out during the week after this goes out, to ask parents to look for this and send it back to. I know our goal of getting kids on campus and in the classrooms on October 5th really relies on this question being answered on who's planning on hybrid and who's planning on remote, because transportation and everything else will fall to planning once we know that answer.
Yes, and we started that. We already had that conversation today about we're sending that out and then getting some reminders from both principals and teachers.
Okay. And then for the screening that's going to be submitted,
on that one, Christy,
go ahead.
I think that because there's been such an overload with emailed communications to parents this semester, sometimes parents have just let emails just stack up. I think that on some of these, it's going to require phone calls to parents to let them know that there's an email that you can't just skip over. This isn't about Canvas. It's not something that, we need an answer. And so there maybe needs to be a plan in place somewhere along the line to make that a one-on-one communication to get people's attention.
We're going to utilize our text messaging too. We get really good response on the text and we don't overutilize that.
No, that's true. Good. And that text leads into my next question. When we're talking about the screening that all students are going to have, I am guilty of not always calling in my 3rd graders' attendance. Mr. Cox mentioned it in a conversation we were having at 12:30 one day last week, and I said, shoot, I forgot attendance today. So is there two things? One is, with the attendance, is there a way to automate this or to send text reminders for those who elect to get a text reminder? Maybe not everybody would want one. I would take it. And for my high school son, I would force him to take that text reminder too, because he's been guilty of not calling in or checking in for attendance too many times. And secondly, regarding the screening, I want to make sure parents really understand, I don't want my kiddo standing on the wall waiting for a health check at the front office because I didn't get a screening in on time. So maybe there's a possibility for a text reminder for that also. Then I kind of wondered, how when you have a dentist appointment and they send you the message that says, this is coming up, reply yes if you'll be at your appointment, da-da-da-da-da. Is that a possibility?
The last part, I don't know on that. I don't think there's any reply ability feature in our Sky Alert system. We are able to schedule texts. The one thing that we'll have to look at, and we haven't done this yet, because there has been some discussion about it, is can we schedule like Monday through Friday at this time that you get this message? We just need to look and see. Google has some capabilities to do that too, so we'll just need to look into that. The other would be the opt-out feature. We want to make sure they can opt out of that message, but not opt out of all of our messages. So it's just something we'll have to look into.
Okay.
Thus far, I will say, and I realize it's a small sampling size, thus far, our pre-K parents have been really good about doing the screen.
We've all made our comments. I've had some questions. Does anybody else have any follow-up comments or questions? Okay. Are we ready to move on to new business then? All right, we have the approval of resolution to adopt the e-learning program in lieu of the district's scheduled emergency days. This was one of our public hearings earlier this evening. Mr. Cox, do you want to discuss this any more before we get a motion?
I'm good. Any additional questions, I'm happy to answer, but otherwise I'm good.
Okay.
And your points noted, Mr. Goebel. I agree. The one person that won't get out of the snow day fiasco is myself. I'll still be out driving roads, but we will be very strict on when we call those and when we do not.
Okay. So I'll need a motion to approve the resolution to adopt an e-learning program in lieu of the district's scheduled emergency days.
So moved.
So moved.
Thank you. I have a first and a second. Or a motion and a second. And Katie, can you call the roll, please?
Mrs. Reynolds? Mrs. Reynolds?
Sorry, I was having a hard time unmuting myself. Yes.
Mr. Utoni?
Yes.
Mr. File?
Yes.
Dr. Magulius?
Yes.
Mr. Carley?
Yes.
Mrs. Johnson?
Yes.
Mr. Goebel?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. And then we have approval of the ISB delegate and discussion of board professional development opportunities.
Dan, you want me to just take this?
Yes, please.
Okay. All right. So the delegate assembly has been set for Saturday, November 14th at 10 a.m. That's a week earlier than it would have been because it normally would have been during the conference. There will be a webinar at 5 o'clock this coming Monday, September 28th, to explain this year's process since it will be different. It will also explain how to pre-register as a delegate. Because dialogue during the assembly is going to be very difficult because there's going to be probably 700 or 800 participants, you know, up to one up to however many school districts there are. So they're going to try to have 2 virtual pre-discussions, October 21st at noon and November 5th at 6 p.m. But only delegates that have pre-registered will be allowed to participate in even those pre-discussions. So we will need to go ahead and get our delegate selected tonight so they can get pre-registered and participate in those discussions. Also, and this is kind of assuming I'll end up being the delegate, but I'm willing to let somebody else be if they're interested. I would like, if once you guys get the packet that lists all of the resolutions, I would really like to have feedback. In our history, I've always been told, oh, we just trust you to vote, you know, and all that. Well, that's flattering, and I like being trusted, but I also want to make sure I'm representing the opinion of everybody on our board. And I will tell you, if I'm the delegate at this point, I plan to vote along the lines of what IASB is recommending. I was part of all those conversations at the process, and I was. All the votes went the way I voted. So that's that part. And then as far as professional development, I had sent you guys the email, but I know that Dan plans in the spring at some point when our new board is all set that we'll do some sort of a team building exercise since we'll be so many new faces. But in the meantime, this Thursday at 1 p.m. is a free webinar about working together as an effective board. I plan to just sit through it. It's free. There might be some good stuff since we kind of have a new composite already. And if you want to do that, again, Katie will get you registered. Is that quick enough?
Yeah, that was great. So Amy's volunteered to be our ISB delegate. Is there anyone who is interested other than Amy? We have one. And if I hear no one else, then I'll need a motion to approve Amy Reynolds as our IASB delegate.
So good.
Thank you. I have Mr. File with a motion and Mrs. Johnson with a second. And Katie, please call the roll.
Mr. Goebel? Mr. Goebel?
His screen's frozen. I don't know if he's given a thumbs up at all.
I can hear him saying yes from the other room.
Perfect.
Yes.
That
Mr.
counts.
Yatoni? Yes. Mr. Yatoni? Mrs. Reynolds?
Yes.
Say yes.
Mrs. Johnson?
Yes.
Mr. Carley?
Yes.
Dr. Magoulias?
Yes.
Mr. File?
Yes.
Okay, we now have consideration and approval to grant superintendent hiring authority for permanent substitute teachers. And Mr. Cox, do you want to discuss this before we get an emotion? Before we get a motion, not emotional. Before we get a motion.
Yes, I would like to make just a couple comments on this specific issue. I'll be brief because we have discussed this prior to, and we just pumped the brakes on this whenever we decided to go remote. But these two, this agenda item and the next agenda item, are specific examples of why dealing with and responding to this pandemic is so unpredictable on our budget, because we're just going to have to do what we need to do in order to get kids in school and keep kids in school and keep staff moving forward. And this is not something we would have thought we were going to be doing a year ago. So we are going through the best we can to identify how much is it really costing us to open school, and then how much is it costing us to keep school open. Not that we won't do it, but I think it's an important number for everyone to understand. And we are blessed that we do have a fund balance to be able to have the ability to respond in the way we need to keep everyone safe and provide the resources. So with that stated, we did discuss the need for substitute teachers. It's going to be an incredible challenge this school year, keeping everybody moving with the quarantines and those things. Today, for example, would have been an incredible challenge. We can do it, but it's not going to be easy. We are allowing people to work from home when they're able to do that. Certainly, if someone cannot work from home, you know, then they would have to take their emergency COVID leave and then ultimately sick days. But thus far, we've been able to work that out. So our plan was to hire substitute teachers and have them committed to the Rochester School District, just as a little bit of a safety measure, and they'll be used. So I'll leave it at that for any questions.
When we do not have a teacher out, if that day happens, that there is not a teacher out for these substitute teachers, what will we be having them do?
So we're still limiting their days. We're guaranteeing their days, so they will not be here 5 days a week. So they're still limited in the number of days that they'll work. But right now, the way it's been going, I won't tell you that we've had a staff member out every single day, but it's close if we haven't.
And how many are we looking to hire?
2.
Okay.
We've not had a ton of applicants. So the last time we posted this, I think we only received 1 or 2, but then when we were going remote instruction, we decided to pause. And to date, I know we have 1 applicant. We might have 2.
Well, I hope they're good. All right.
You get all the glory of being a substitute teacher and none of the flexibility.
The reason I would be asking for, yes, that's exactly right. The reason I'm asking for hiring authority is because by the time we get rolling with our next board meeting is not till the 3rd Monday in October, and we're already going to be going. So if we find somebody and they're so hard to find, we'd like to be able to lock them up, and then we would bring them before the board for final approval and to get them in the minutes next month for both of these positions.
Okay. Any other questions? All right, I'll need a motion to give the superintendent hiring authority for permanent substitute teachers.
So moved.
Thank you, Mrs. Reynolds.
Second.
Thank you, Mrs. Johnson. Okay, Katie, please call the roll.
Mrs. Johnson?
Yes.
Mr. Goebel?
I hear you.
Yes.
Mr. Goebel? Oh, there we are.
Yes.
Okay, great.
My phone, yeah.
Mrs. Reynolds?
This thing is
Yes.
awful right now.
All right. Mr. Gattoni,
Yes.
Mr. Carly,
Yes.
Mr. File,
Yes.
Dr. Magulius.
Yes. Okay, next, consideration and approval to grant superintendent hiring authority for a part-time substitute nurse. Mr. Cox, do you want to take this?
Yes. What we're looking at, again, transitioning students into hybrid instruction, the nurses have become a extremely critical role in. Nurses are always critical, but they're extremely critical right now in going through our screening with our students, our health safety procedures, and will be key for us once we get people here, trying to keep them here and be able to effectively identify and contact trace. You heard me earlier mention that our health department is overwhelmed and not very expedient at the moment at contact tracing. For all intents and purposes, that responsibility has been placed on us as a school district. That we're doing our own contact tracing. The intent here is that we would hire this individual to be here on school days when students are present, Tuesday through Friday for the time being under the current model, and that this individual would be housed at the 2-3 building. So currently we have one nurse that travels between the 2 elementary buildings. That's hard under normal circumstances, but during the pandemic, we can't control there's not one office to send to. If we had one roof of those buildings, yes, there'd be one office where teachers could send kids. There'd be the isolation room and all of that, but it's all doubled. We can't tell our teachers to only send kids in the afternoon when the nurse is there, or only in the morning when the nurse is there, or have that nurse running back and forth. That individual would always be, or she would always be at the wrong place. The other piece is if one of our nurses goes down and quarantines, that's going to be another critical component because that individual would have to help fill in wherever we're missing someone. Those are the main points, and then I just lost my train of thought with one other piece. But if there's any questions, otherwise I'll stop.
I have a question. It seems to me that there ought to be an S on the end of nurse, that you need to be able to hire part-time substitute nurses just like you can permanent substitute teachers. I don't see why not have a couple, because as we get started, we're getting to no man's land.
We do have substitute nurses on. This is just a matter of locking them in so that they would be here every day, Tuesday through Friday.
It's a contract situation.
But it is only one.
Correct. And we do have other subs on our list, albeit I think it's very minimal.
Sure. Okay. All right, well, I will need a motion. If I don't hear any other comments or questions, I'll need a motion to give the superintendent hiring authority for a part-time substitute nurse.
So moved.
Thank you, Mr. Farley. Thank you, Mrs. Johnson. Okay, call the roll, please.
Dr. Magulius?
Yes.
Mr. File?
Yes.
Mr. Gattoni?
Yes.
Mrs. Johnson?
Yes.
Mr. Goebel?
Yes.
Mrs. Reynolds?
Yes.
Mr. Carly?
Yes.
Thank you. Okay, before we go into closed session, we'll take care of miscellaneous right now. I want to start by saying thank you to any students who have stuck with us through this long meeting this evening. Hope it was helpful to you and you learned something from it. Any other items for miscellaneous?
I want to say I appreciate the reports that we get from all the areas. That really helps us kind of keep up with each person and what's on their mind. So I appreciate those reports written. And I know that's not something you'd like to do, but it sure does help me as a board member.
Anything else from the crowd? Okay. Then I'll entertain a motion to go into closed session for the appointment, employment, compensation, discipline, performance, or dismissal of specific employees and litigation concerns.
So moved.
Thank you.
Second.
Thank you, Mr. File. Okay, call the roll for this.
Mrs. Reynolds?
Yes.
Mr. Johnson?
Yes.
Mrs. Johnson, excuse me. Sorry, Mr. Yatoni?
Yes.
Mr. Goebel?
Yes.
Mr. Carley?
Yes.
Mr. File?
Yes.
Dr. Magoulias?
Yes. Else to come before the board?
We need to approve the personnel report.
Oh, I skipped a whole section, didn't I? Thank you. So I'll entertain a motion to approve the personnel report.
So moved.
I make that.
Thank you, Mrs. Reynolds and Mr. File for the second. Call the roll, please.
Mrs. Johnson?
Yes.
Mr. Yatoni?
Yes.
Dr. Magoulias?
Yes.
Mr. Carley?
Yes.
Mr. Goebel?
Yes.
Mr. File?
Yes.
Mrs. Reynolds?
Yes.
Okay, I will entertain a motion to approve the early retirement incentive applications for 2 employees.
We should probably name those employees.
Can you name them for me? Nancy Wilbaum and Dennis
Jones.
Jones.
Can you make sure that's in the minutes, Katie?
Will do.
Thank you, Katie.
And the motion too. Thank you.
I'll make the motion.
Thank you, Mrs. Reynolds.
Second.
Thank you. Okay, call the roll.
Mr. File?
Yes.
Mrs. Reynolds?
Yes.
Dr. Magoulias?
Yes.
Mrs. Johnson?
Yes.
Mr. Carley?
Yes.
Mr. Goebel?
Yes.
Mr. Yatoni?
Yes.
Okay. I think now that's it. Anything else to come before the board? All right.
Amy and Don, can you hang on for 30 seconds after we adjourn?
Absolutely.
Who do you need?
Just Amy and Don.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. I need a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Thank you. Second.
So moved.
Thank you. Okay. All in favor, say aye.
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 Meeting adjourned at 8:39 p.m.